Not all the stories you hear are just products of imagination. Some of them, the most disturbing ones, have deep roots in reality. There are events that defy logic, occurrences that words can barely describe, yet they have left scars on those who experience them. What you are about to hear is not just a horror story, it is an echo of what truly happened. Whether you believe it or not, that's up to you. But remember, sometimes the truest fear comes from the things we can't explain. Get ready to face the inexplicable. Story 1: The Deadly Silence. That summer afternoon was unusually peaceful. The sun was beginning to set behind the mountains, painting the sky a soft orange that reflected on the waters of the isolated lake. João, an experienced fisherman, chose that remote lake precisely for its tranquility, far from the city's hustle and the distractions of the modern world. All he wanted was a day of peace, just him and nature. As he prepared his gear on the shore, the silence was almost tangible. No sounds of animals, not even the rustling of leaves. Only the gentle sound of the water lapping at the lake's edge. It was strange, but João didn't pay much attention to it. Perhaps this was exactly what he needed, a complete calm, a silence that could clear his mind. He cast his line into the water, feeling the light breeze on his face. Time seemed to pass slowly, as if the lake itself was lazily marking the hours. After some time, something tugged at his line. João smiled, thinking of a good catch, but as he started to reel it in, he felt an odd resistance, as if something was fiercely fighting not to be brought to the surface. With force, he pulled the line, and to his surprise, there was no fish at all. The line was snagged on something heavy, but when he finally pulled it free, what emerged from the deep waters made him instinctively recoil. It was an old doll, weathered by time, its glassy eyes staring blankly at him. How had it ended up there? And more importantly, why was it tangled in his line? A sense of unease began to grow inside him. The silence around him now felt oppressive, as if the lake was hiding a dark secret. He tried to ignore it, tossing the doll back into the water and casting his line again. But with each cast, something continued to disturb him. Sometimes it was a strange movement in the water, as if something was swimming just below the surface. Other times, it was a cold breeze that appeared out of nowhere, making João's skin crawl. Night fell, bringing with it a dense darkness, without moon or stars. João should have packed up and headed home, but something held him there. A morbid curiosity kept him rooted to that spot, as if the lake had a hold on him. And then, he heard it. A subtle sound, coming from the middle of the lake. It sounded like a whisper, a low murmur that gradually grew louder, echoing in the absolute silence of the night. João approached the edge of the lake, trying to hear better. The sound intensified, and now he could make out words. They were pleas, cries for help in a voice that seemed distant, as if coming from another world. Terror gripped him, but his feet were rooted to the ground, unable to move. Suddenly, something emerged from the water, quick and silent. João barely had time to react before he was dragged into the lake, his hands clawing at the earth, but being pulled with irresistible force. The last sound he heard before being swallowed by the dark waters was the same whisper, now clearer, as if it was right next to him. When the police found his abandoned boat the next morning, there was no sign of João. Only his belongings were left, intact, and the fishing line was still in the water, now snagged on an old doll that floated gently on the surface, its glassy eyes turned toward the sky, as if waiting for the next victim. Story 2: The Dark Presence. Diego had always been passionate about night fishing. He believed that the most interesting fish came out at night, when the world was silent and the senses were more alert. On that night, he decided to explore a river that few knew, hidden deep within a dense forest. The place had a dark reputation, but Diego wasn't the type to be intimidated by local legends. For him, the mystery was part of the adventure. He followed the trail until he reached the riverbank. The full moon shone brightly, illuminating the calm waters that reflected the tall trees around. The environment was serene, almost inviting. Diego set up his gear with the precision of someone who had done it 1,000 times, casting his line into the water and settling onto a fallen log to wait. Time passed slowly, but Diego didn't mind. He was absorbed in the gentle sound of the running water, the rustling of the trees in the wind. Suddenly, his rod jerked. Something big had taken the bait. Smiling, he began to reel in the line, feeling the resistance of what seemed to be a large, strong fish. But as he brought his catch closer to the surface, something started to feel wrong. The weight on the line was uneven, as if he was pulling in more than just a fish. When he finally saw what he had caught, his blood ran cold. It wasn't a fish. It was an old, tangled fishing net, covered in mud and grime. However, what was trapped inside it was what terrified Diego the most, the remains of a human body, or what was left of it. The disfigured face and exposed bones were wrapped in the net, the skin blackened by the stagnant water. But the most disturbing part was the empty gaze that seemed to stare at him, as if the soul of that body was still trapped there, in the depths of the river. Diego recoiled, trying to free himself from the net and the remnants of the body, but his hands were shaking so much that he could barely release the line. What was this? An accident? A murder? His heart raced as his mind struggled to process what was in front of him. Finally, with a desperate effort, he threw everything back into the river, as if trying to erase that moment from reality. But the terror was just beginning. As soon as the net sank back into the dark waters, the once calm river began to churn violently, as if something deep within was stirring. Waves formed out of nowhere, and the sound of the river changed from gentle to something grotesque, as if unseen creatures were swimming frantically beneath the surface. Diego froze, panic overtaking him. He knew he needed to leave, but his feet felt glued to the ground. Then, he felt it. Something cold, wet, grasping at his ankle. When he looked down, he saw a skeletal hand rising from the water, gripping his leg tightly. He screamed, trying to break free, but the hand pulled with inhuman strength, dragging him toward the river. In one last effort, Diego tried to grab the edge of the log, but the pull was too strong. He was dragged into the water, his screams drowned out by the sound of the waves. The river swallowed him, and silence returned quickly, as if nothing had happened. The next morning, the river was as calm as ever. No sign of Diego or any struggle. Just an abandoned fishing rod on the bank, the line still stretched into the water. If these stories are already giving you chills, imagine what else we have in store for you. Don't waste any time, subscribe now and make sure you won't miss any of the upcoming narratives that will keep you up at night. You won't want to miss out. Story 3: The Last Cast at Sea. Carlos was an experienced sailor, known among the fishermen in his village for his bravery in facing the most treacherous waters. That night, he decided he would do something no one else dared: fish in open waters during an approaching storm. He always believed that the biggest fish appeared in the most dangerous moments, and he wanted a catch that no one would ever forget. With his boat ready and his gear prepared, Carlos set out alone towards the horizon, as the sky began to fill with dark, threatening clouds. The wind blew hard, and the waves grew bigger by the minute. But he was determined. The sea, to him, was like an old friend who sometimes got angry but would never betray him. When he reached a spot he believed was perfect, he cast his line into the choppy sea, holding on tight as the boat rocked violently. Time passed, and the storm intensified, but Carlos didn't back down. He knew something big was down there, something worth the risk. Suddenly, the line pulled with unexpected force, almost knocking him over. Carlos held on with all his strength, his heart racing as he imagined the size of the fish he was about to catch. But as he fought to bring his catch to the surface, something began to feel very wrong. The water around the boat started to swirl, as if a whirlpool was forming, but that wasn't the worst of it. He felt a penetrating cold, something that didn't come from the wind or the rain, but from the sea itself. When he finally saw what was caught on his line, a sensation of pure terror washed over him. Emerging from the depths, it wasn't a fish, but a human figure, entangled in the fishing line. The pale, water-swollen skin, the empty eyes, and the gaping mouth in a silent scream. Carlos tried to release the line, but it seemed that the figure was stuck, holding on with an inexplicable force. It was as if death itself was clinging to him, refusing to return to the depths. Desperate, he tried to cut the line, but before he could do anything, the figure began to move. Slowly, it climbed up the line, getting closer and closer to the boat. The dead eyes seemed to fixate on Carlos, and he felt as if he was being pulled into that lifeless void. The sea, which had once seemed like his ally, was now against him. The boat began to sink, pulled down by the weight of the figure emerging. Carlos screamed for help, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the waves and the thunder that tore through the sky. He fought with all his might, but it was useless. The figure, now fully out of the water, reached out and grabbed Carlos's arm with a strength he had never felt before. And then, in the blink of an eye, everything went silent. The boat, the storm, the figure, everything vanished as if it had never existed. The next morning, when the village fishermen went out to sea, they found only floating debris. Among them, a single sign of Carlos, his fishing knife, embedded in a plank that still floated in the water. No body, no boat, nothing else was found. The sea, which had so often been his refuge, had claimed him back. And in its dark waters, Carlos's last cast remained as a warning to all who dared challenge what lives in the depths. Story for the bait that should never be used. Raphael was a fisherman like no other. He knew all the tricks, all the techniques, and had a special knack for finding the perfect bait. But there was one story that had always intrigued him, something he had heard from his grandfather when he was a child. A special bait, unique, capable of attracting the rarest and most valuable fish, but it also carried a curse. No one who used it ever came back to tell the tale. Curious and daring, Raphael never believed in superstitions. To him, it was just a legend created to scare the younger generations. So when an old sailor offered him a strange bait, made of a material he couldn't identify, he accepted without hesitation. The man warned him, with a serious expression, this bait was made to attract the worst from the bottom of the sea. Use it at your own risk. Raphael laughed, thanked him, and set out to sea. The idea of catching something extraordinary excited him, and he couldn't wait to test the new bait. Reaching an isolated spot, far from the coast, he prepared his equipment and, with a confident smile, cast the bait into the deep waters. For a while, nothing happened. The sea was calm, and the night fell without any significant events. But then, the line started to move, slowly at first, and then with almost superhuman force. Raphael felt the pull and knew there was something big down there. Something he could never have imagined. He held onto the rod tightly, but whatever was on the line was pulling with brutal intensity. The boat began to rock, and the once calm sea turned violent. Raphael struggled to stay on his feet, but the force on the line seemed to want to drag him to the bottom. Suddenly, the line slackened, and he thought he had lost the catch. But as he started to reel it back in, he saw that something was wrong. The bait, which should have brought up a fish, was bringing something else to the surface. Something heavy, dark, like a shadow growing in the water. When he finally saw it, his heart nearly stopped. What emerged wasn't a fish, but a grotesque, misshapen creature, a twisted mix of forms that made no sense. Tentacles covered in scales, eyes that seemed to come from nightmares, and a mouth full of sharp teeth, much larger than anything he had ever seen. The creature seemed made of darkness, as if pure evil had taken form. Raphael tried to release the line, but the creature moved too quickly. It climbed onto the boat, its tentacles gripping the sides, and in an instant, it was on him. The creature's gaze was hypnotic, filled with ancient malice, as if it had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Raphael grabbed the boat's radio and made a distress call to the Coast Guard, but there was no response. He screamed, but the sound was lost in the waves crashing furiously against the boat. The creature wrapped its tentacles around Raphael, and he felt the crushing force squeezing his body. He tried to fight, but it was useless. The last sound he heard was the crack of bones, followed by a deep silence. The next morning, when the boat was found adrift, there was no sign of Raphael. The only thing left was the bait, now stuck on the end of the rod, dripping a dark liquid that no one could identify. It was taken back to land, but no one dared touch it. The bait, so innocent in appearance, was locked in a box, hidden away so that no one else could use it. But the sea never forgets. And in the darkness of the depths, something still moved, waiting for the next time the bait would be cast. And when that happened, the sea would claim another soul. If you're like us and love exploring the darkest corners of the mind, where the unknown waits to surprise you, then this is the place for you. Here, stories never end well, and fear is our constant companion. Subscribe to make sure you don't miss any of our upcoming terrifying narratives. Let us guide you through more of these dark journeys, where each new story is scarier than the last. Are you ready to face what's coming? Join us, if you dare. It takes the patience of a fisherman, sitting on the banks of a river, waiting in the silence. Only then is it possible to catch the dark truths that hide in the deep and treacherous waters between the lines. Such is the human mind, a labyrinth of shadows and secrets, where the light doesn't always reach.